This is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm Riv.
And I'm Joe Barnhart. I want you to know if you do or don't believe in God, you are not alone and shouldn't be. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics and others. And this is a show for you and for people committed to a life rooted in science and rational thinking without the supernatural.
And today's show, Faithless and I will resume grilling Joe on the origin of ethics. But before we dive in further, we want to ask our viewers, how do we sound out there? Are you coming in clear? Please let us know any audio programs, tell your cable television channel, and which channel, provider which channel.
And now we want to let viewers know about our show's sponsors. So, Rev, you're up.
Yes.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. Tonight's meetup is at the new location, Flats and Taps, which is on the screen there, 7403 Kingston Pike, Knoxville, Tennessee, 37919. When you get to the meetup, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table.
And we need a picture of our God delusion.
And go ahead.
All right. And as Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
All right. Well, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. The first and third Sunday mornings of the month are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday, we hold the Skeptics Book Club. And on the fourth Sunday, we're mixing it up, sometimes with a potluck get-together at a member's home, which we call the Reflections Meeting. Or maybe we do some board games. Once in a while, we've done, a movie get-together.
Okay, and later in the show, we'll give you our website to visit for additional details, including times and locations. So let's go to the news.
All righty. So we're going to review a little in the news. It's been something we've mentioned the past few weeks. It's about the FFRF student scholarship essays. Rev, do you want to read about the categories?
All right. So the FFRF sponsors 4 essay competitions for students. Please see the descriptions below to enter the correct competition. All 4 essays offer the same rewards. And that is first place, $3,000. Second place, $2,000. Third place, $1,000. Fourth place, $750. Fifth place, $500. Sixth place, $400. And depending, optional honorable mentions at $200. And the winners, in addition to their scholarship, will receive a school year membership, in FFRF. That includes the subscription to Freethought Today, FFRF's newspaper published 10 times a year, which will publish winning essays. All other eligible entrants will be offered the choice of a student FFRF membership and Freethought Today subscription, or a Freethought book or product.
All right. So there are only 2 scholarships that remain open. The deadline has passed for the scholarships for high school students. So we have the Michael Hakim Memorial College Essay Competition. This is for ongoing North American undergraduate college students to age 25. If you are entering college for the first time in the fall of 2017, please enter. They're referencing the high school contest, which have already closed. If you will graduate from college by the spring or summer of 2017, you are eligible to enter this contest. If you are an undergraduate student, age 25 to 30, you must enter graduate or older student contest. I guess that we'll be reading about next. So the topic of the essay contest that you're to write to is, my morals do not come from God, they come from, and that's where you fill in the blank. The word limit is 450 to 650 words. The deadline for submission is July 1st, 2017. Winners will be announced in August, And once again, look for the rules on the online application form.
And next and last, we have the Brian Bolton Graduate / Older Student Essay Contest. And that is open to North American graduate students up to age 30, or undergraduate students ages 25 to 30. You are also eligible to enter this contest if you will graduate by spring or summer of 2017. The topic is, why religious liberty shouldn't mean the right to impose your religion on others. Word limit is 600 to 750 words. That seems a bit limiting, personally, but deadline is July 15th, 2017. Winners will be announced in September. Please review the rules and prompts on the online application form. www.ffrf.org.
And we've got a slide that shows a screen capture of how to navigate their website. Their website is a little counterintuitive. You got to go to the outreach link, and then once you hover over it, it drops down, and you can find the student essay contest link. Took me a while to find it when I went there.
Oh.
All righty. Well, we're ready to go back to the main part of the program, and we want to pick up where we left off last week after a brief review. So we're going to hurry through some slides here. We need the ethics slide. We read a dictionary definition of ethics. The high points were moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity, or, definition 2, the branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles. And we made the case that ethics emerge when creatures live in social groups because societies need rules and ethics to function. And then working roughly historically, we mentioned Plato. He lived from about 423 to 384 BC. He was a philosopher of classical Greece, founder of the Academy in Athens, the world's first institution of higher learning in the Western civilization, and he's widely considered the most pivotal figure in the development of philosophy, especially the Western tradition. I'm repeating myself. And unlike nearly all of his philosophical contemporaries, Plato's entire work is believed to have survived intact for over 2,400 years, including what Plato wrote about Socrates. And a caller question from last week made Rev want to bring up the so-called Euthyphro dilemma. Rev, help us here.
It's a doozy, and it has a lot of staying power. Just because it's what it is. So, Socrates, it's commonly referred to as the Euthyphro. And the context there is that Socrates and Euthyphro are both outside a courthouse, awaiting their respective trials, and they give a conversation. They have discourse over the nature of piety and what it means to everyone. And so Euthyphro argues that his cause, in his case, bringing charges against his father, is just, is pious, because the gods command it. So Socrates queries why Euthyphro is so certain, and really bringing the rationality of such permanent edicts into question. And after they have some more dialogue, more circular answers, eventually Socrates asks Euthyphro if justice is what the gods command, or if the gods must obey justice, which is therefore of a higher order than even the gods.
So, before the program, we were reviewing that to make sure we stated the problem correctly. I've read the dilemma posed on several websites, and the vocabulary of it changes from one to the other. The word piety is used sometimes, justice is used. I think maybe even virtue may have been used in some. Have you ever seen a different word that was used as the focus?
That's my memory, but I'm just calling them memory.
Okay.
Well, Aristotle had the virtue theory, and that was a separate thing.
But that's not the Euthyphro dilemma. So I was first exposed to the Euthyphro dilemma in one of the rationalists of East Tennessee meetings when then resident of East Tennessee, Massimo, whose last name I will always mangle, Puglisi, was an active member here. It was one of his favorite things to bring up. And so if we go on one horn of the dilemma, that whatever the God says is just or pious or virtuous, then if we pose the question, if the God were to say something that to us seems, maybe ghastly,
Immoral.
or immoral, like you go and kill your neighbors and take their land, and that's therefore just, we should find that troublesome. And in the dialogue, Euthyphro did kind of find that troublesome.
Well, and also, if I can, a quick thing on that. So the talk of horns and everything, it's just a quick mention that I think what's interesting about that it's a horn is that it's not an optional, in that context, it's not an optional situation where you can just don't worry about it, because the very term of a bull's horns is if you let it go, the bull's horns, you're holding the bull, bad things will happen if you just let go of the bull. So you have to choose one horn or the other. And in that case, it's interesting because in either way, you're left with a problematic situation. So it just seems like.
So, but if someone were to make the argument that we've got to accept whatever is good, what God commands, that's referred to as what kind of theory, Joe?
You got the categorical imperative.
There we go. And you said that earlier,
Yeah.
and I had to say, oh my goodness, categorical imperative, as opposed to what was the other one?
Hypothetical imperative.
Hypothetical. Those words didn't at all match the way I thought about it. It's outside my vocabulary.
Sure, yeah.
Not having had a theological philosophy class that would have explored it that way. So help us with this categorical imperative and hypothetical imperative.
The hypothetical means if, then. If we want, desire, need certain things, then we must and ought to do such and such.
Okay. And that's the opposite horn of the, so to speak, dilemma.
The others are just, they're just commands that come down, and those are the categorical, you see. And the utilitarians and others have argued, no, that's not ethics, that's power.
And they're not able, in a sense, they're appealing to, let's call it, an intrinsic sense of morality. They can't be arguing it based on any prior set of assumptions. They simply have to say that's not an outcome that we're willing to find as acceptable.
Yeah, but among those who hold to this, they do have some differences. For example, if you make the assumption, as many believers in a God hold, that God is good, then you've got the dilemma already. If certain kinds of activities said to be in the name of God don't appear to be good, then you don't have a God here. It's just using the name. So you have to have some definition of God in the first place to say God is good.
And in fact, last week's caller,
Exactly.
you disputed over whether what the caller called God should be called God. You said the caller, in a sense, was an atheist, because you didn't agree that something that should be called God would have the attributes of the God the caller had.
Said, and what I wanted to point out, and I think you would agree, you have great diversity among Christians, and you have great diversity among atheists. I mean, I can see a lot of good atheists who would say an atheist like Stalin and other atheists like that are evil and wicked people, plain and simple.
And when we use it's frustrating, and it's I'm careful to say bemusing at the same time. Someone feeling bad about that, but when we might use something like the word evil, all of a sudden there's this red flag that goes up to say, well, you can't claim evil because you don't believe in evil, and they're not even talking past each other. You're trying,
Yeah, well, that's why it's good to get down. I mean, I was president of the Southwest Division of the American Academy of Religion, and we had all kinds of diversity in there, and we learned to say, well, we try to use ordinary language to start with, so that we all agree on different uses of words. and then find out where we disagree.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I think if I'd been there, I'd have insisted on getting out a great big sheet of paper and writing down definitions as we went. And I would say, well, before we use this word, I've written a definition here. Does anyone disagree with it? Because if anyone disagrees, we can't proceed until we either persuade them to, at least for the sake of the period that we're discussing it in this room today, you're going to use this definition faithfully, or alternatively, pick another word that means what you think that we can all agree on. But until we have common agreement, we're wasting our time.
Yeah, sometimes among theologians you have what could be called God number one definition, God number two definition, even among and so forth.
Well, and that brings at least me back to thinking about one more another thing to observe about the Euthyphro dilemma.
Uh-huh.
If good is not good because God merely commands it to, if it's somehow independent of what God commands,
mm-hmm.
and if the gods are a good God,
mm-hmm.
and therefore can do no wrong, does that mean that the God is superfluous in terms at least of defining good? The God has no functioning value.
Right, just a middle entity that just causes more problems than anything else.
On that particular issue, there'd be various theists who would agree with you on that.
And then a related kind of question is then, if a God then is compelled to do the good,
mm-hmm. What is
does God have free will? Does God have free will if a good God can only do good and is compelled to do good?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
You run into also kind of a paradox of, if that God is bound to good, but it defines good, then is it bound to what it says? But if it's unchanging, then...
Well, I think, Rev, though, if the God is bound to do good, we would only be talking about the horn where the deity is not the one who's commanding what good is. Right. Therefore, in a sense, there is something else to appeal to say some other sense of morality. And that's what makes the God superfluous. He's not serving a function.
On the issue, even if you're a theist, you've got to still raise the question, what is good? How do you determine good?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can determine whether or not what you call God is good or not. But if you don't have an independent way of talking about goodness, then you can't determine whether what someone calls God is good or not. and therefore, if you're going to call it God and you call it good, then does it measure up?
Right. And what if in one of you causing pain was thought to be good?
Well, that's called the problem of evil, or theodicy, as it's often called. And most theologians recognize the problem. In fact, you have E.S. Brightman, is a philosopher of religion, who did a major study on the problem of evil. And he said God has a will to value, a rational given, and the non-rational, in that God has energy that cannot be totally controlled according to his rational, and that accounts for tornadoes and destruction and so forth.
I've never come across that.
I was going to say, how is that different from saying that God is schizophrenic?
No, it's not schizophrenic. He's like you, and you're not schizophrenic, but you're not totally in control of everything rationally.
Okay. Well, all right, then he's not an omnipotent God.
Not omnipotent.
Okay.
Not omnipotent.
Like can do the most maximal good and can know the most maximal knowledge insofar as...
From Brightman's point of view, he's omnipotent enough or strong enough to create a universe, but it's not totally with all perfection.
I was about to say, it sounds like I've picked up a handful of sand. I've picked it up, but some's running out through my fingertips. Hey, we're getting a signal there's a call. Joe, push that button. Let's greet our caller.
Okay, let's hear from our caller.
Hello, this is Freethought Forum. Give us a name or a nickname, please.
It's Charles from Central Illinois.
Hello, Charles. Remote report from Central Illinois. What have you got for us today?
The concept of good and evil and God Interestingly enough, in the Bible, God says something to the effect that I'm the author of all that is good and evil. So, if God is good, why is he committing evil acts?
He's not the author of confusion as well.
It's, this is a question I've always been trying to get many Christian theists to deal with. He is the author of evil acts. So, if he's good, why is he doing evil acts?
So, Charles, when I read the Bible, I tried to do it with the most charitable interpretation that I could.
Good point.
And as I read things like that, I thought that, okay, he is the author of evil in that he sends maybe painful experiences to us to teach us.
I think most interpreters would do,
And that's the most charitable way I can think of it, that, if humanity needs correcting because they've been misbehaving, he therefore sends evil as a punishment. He spanks the childish humanity.
But look how well that's worked.
Oh, well, I didn't say...
He actually killed off virtually the entire human race to get rid of evil, and look how well that worked.
Yes, if the Bible be true, he drowned all but 8 people, and it still didn't fix the problem he was apparently mad about.
And there is evidence of it happening too, but
well, the reason what I was getting at there is that maybe we have 2 different meanings of the word evil when we talk about it this way. One definition of the word evil is, why is there pain and suffering? For no apparent purpose, maybe. Whereas the thing in the Bible, there may have been a purpose, even if it's a bad one, morally reprehensible, its author thought it had a purpose. And that is a little different than unpurposeful suffering.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
Him just standing around twiddling his thumbs while the walking, talking snake lay a load of 4-inch scatology down on to a completely naive young lady who didn't even know that lying existed. Doesn't sound like an author of all that is good. It's more like author of all that's, standing around twiddling his thumb and let whatever happens, happens.
Okay, so let's take your point, and I'll try and make it as strong as I can. If we think that what the serpent did in the garden with Eve as evil, it sure looks like the Hebrew Bible is trying to sort of point out, or trying to make it look like he wasn't responsible for that. Yet elsewhere, even in the Hebrew Bible, it says that he makes evil as well.
Yeah.
So we've caught the Hebrew Bible being inconsistent with itself.
And that's because...
No surprise here, viewers. No surprise.
That's because the Hebrew Bible is not just one voice. It's a whole tradition of many literary genres and many views trying to stitch it all together over centuries.
All right.
And the final one being the 70 scholars around 200 BCE. And when you get 70 people together and try to get them to do the same thing at one time without having any kind of squabbles or mistakes or oversights, I want to see that.
Yeah.
Whether they're atheists or theists, it'd be the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
In other words, what you're saying, these are written by human mortals.
All right. Well, Charles, we got a lot more people to cover here. We got to talk about a Mr. Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mills and Immanuel Kant.
Okay.
Why don't we say thanks for calling. You go back to listening, and if we get something wrong, call us back.
I will.
All righty. Goodbye then.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So we've caught up to where we were last week, and we're only halfway through the show. I've got down written here, Jeremy Bentham. Help us with, why did you ask me to have a slide on Jeremy Bentham?
Well,
Joe?
Bentham, we touched on this very lightly last time. Says you got to say what's ethics about anyhow.
All right.
And he says it's primarily he tried to reduce it to pleasure and happiness.
All right.
In other words, it's what people want is pleasure and happiness. But if then, if you want pleasure and happiness, living in a world of nature, living in the world of other creatures, including our own, then you must and ought to do certain things and ought not to do certain other things. Otherwise, you're going to mess up the happiness. And it's the same as driving a car.
Mm-hmm.
If I like to watch clouds when I'm driving, but if I keep doing that, I'm not going to be watching very many clouds on Earth.
There we go. There we
So
go.
I ought to pay attention to the road.
So his idea for how to define, well, I was about to say the good or the moral, and then I realized, am I stating the problem correctly? Is utilitarian. It's what we get out. And to some extent, it is the opposite of evil if we define evil as that which gets in the way of
our happiness,
and the happiness of others.
And our joy, and yeah, exactly.
I might extend evil as well to not being not so much as inconveniences, but
say that again now.
Not necessarily just inconveniences, because sometimes inconveniences are necessary to keep us safe and so on and so on. But I might, if I were to put it succinctly in all the ways it could be described, I might put evil as egregious maliciousness.
That's good. I like that.
For a long time, I was trying to define evil as, in a way, two distinct kinds. And I would say it this way. There's a kind of evil that arises due to just plain scarcity in nature. I get hungry, I need to eat things because energy is scarce and I have to go out and acquire energy, and sometimes that means I'm killing plants and animals. So merely to eat and continue to living, I'm committing a certain kind of evil against other living creatures. But then there's an evil of what I was going to say, a different kind, and that is someone who would harm an animal because they get pleasure out of harming the animal. They're not wanting, or a person, they're not wanting to eat it. They're not doing it for an instrumental reason. They like to cause pain. They would be sociopathic of the worst kind.
Yeah, we use the word. In other words, Bentham would say, Bentham says ethics is based on pleasure, but here's the sociopath, gets pleasure in doing harm.
Yes.
Sadistic and so on, so on.
Yeah, and that's why we use the word evil about somebody like that.
And I was trying to make a point that I was asserting there are two kinds of evil, and if you don't recognize the difference between them and you speak in generalities, you may say nonsense. Because I think we could feel entirely justified as a society using whatever force and self-defense against the person who commits evil for their own pleasure and preventing them to do so. Sure. In fact, the concept came up in the discussion of death penalty. But we don't kill people as a penalty for having, found and eaten food, even though they are killing life when they find and eat food. I guess there's a gray area there. If they were killing and eating people, we frown on that. But eating a head of cabbage or some chicken, we don't think of that as a great moral failing. It's the norm for us as omnivores.
Right, and
most of us are omnivores. My apologies to the various kinds of vegetarians out there, the categories of which I'll confess I don't know.
Right, and it's so easy to get into a long dive of it, but just to even barely mention it, it would also, I think, come into light the kinds of, and now the vegetarian threw me off. Sorry. No, it's not. It just threw me off. I was going to say something about what one might consider. Like, there are cases, now they're rare, but there are cases of people, and Kant speaks to this a bit as well, of...
You're making a point. What is it?
So people can sometimes make contracts, and they would say, yes, I agree to be eaten, or something like that. But in another light, that's taking a whole lot of things into consideration. What are they doing in regard to their friends, their family, people who care about them, the things that they affect the people around them? They may make an individual contract, but if it's something of the nature that is wholly unnecessary for life and so on things, then it goes to that area where the other reasons for doing that. But
so this is, I think you're saying partly or implying, part of what we call good implies the benefit and happiness and pleasure and joy of other people. And so what's good for me is involved also in, I mean, a solipsist presumably is a guy who just lives with himself alone, but most people would choose not to live a life like that. It would not be much, it'd be boring for one thing.
So in terms of, I grabbed notes here out of the Wikipedia page on Jeremy Bentham. They mention a principle that it is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong. And so I read that, and while I can find sympathy with that, I tend to want to say, if he were here, I would want to press him on certain issues and say, if this great happiness for a great number of people might involve us having to kill and eat one member of society, are we entitled to do that? I would have to say no. That we somehow have to prevent a few individuals from bearing the unbearable burdens for this otherwise maximum. And to the extent that it's written that way, there's no way to weigh one against the other.
I think Bentham and his other works would agree with you.
And that is the problem. When you've got only one sentence, that you may not have the full qualification.
But that's a good critique, though. The greatest for the greatest number, but how about the individual? In other words, you've got to include the individuals in the great number.
And as I read this, I was reminded of, goodness, I think he's a 20th century philosopher named Rawls, who came up with this really cool idea, the veil of ignorance, about if we're trying to design rules for society, we should do so with a veil of ignorance, where we don't know if we're going to be maybe one of the more fortunate or less fortunate people when we're to be born. And that helps you say, all right, what should be the rules of society so that we get this kind of maximum or fair and equitable rules.
Fairness for everyone.
Yeah.
And there's a type of utilitarianism, I think, called rule utilitarianism. And that basically addresses such a problem that would say, well, we have 5 people here who all need body transplants from a person who lives down the street and is, they think he's just a nuisance on people, whatever. Let's just kill him and hack up his body and save these 5 people. One mode of utilitarianism, classic act utilitarianism, might say, what's the problem? But rule comes along and says, well, in the long run, that's a bad thing. So we need to establish rules to make sure we don't participate in such violent behavior.
We need to move on, but before we do, it was remarkable that Bentham had also championed some things that I think of as only having become successful in the latter half of the 20th century. Equal rights for women, separation of church and state, right to divorce. I mean, it was within my early lifetime that things like no-fault divorce became the norm throughout the United States. Prior to that, for a divorce to happen, you had to have one spouse or another being, so to speak, accused of breaking the marriage contract. And now, sometimes they were happy to accuse one another of that, but sometimes an otherwise amicable divorce, they would simply concoct a story that would meet the test of the law so that they could then get a divorce. So he called for abolition of slavery, of the death penalty, and physical punishment. When I read that, it made me wonder, well, what did they mean by physical punishment? Did they mean something like branding or maiming, or did they mean hard labor? Any idea what they might have meant, Joe, by physical punishment, what Bentham might have been writing about?
Well, it was trying to distinguish from mental, and we can more have public definition of physical. We can see it being done to someone.
Okay, so for instance, in places in Asia, currently they still cane people in public as a form of both a physical as well as a public humiliation.
Yeah.
All right. So maybe we should push on and try and cover John Stuart Mill's. So I guess Mills is a student of Bentham's and continues at least along in a very similar flavor. But how would we, where would they be the same and where might they be different? Help us with that, Joe.
Well, the main thing, I believe, for Mill is he was trying to develop it into political theory of human rights.
And by political meaning how we should design government?
Yeah, in other words, what the limits of government are and what the duties of government are, and how do you define what a duty of government is? Well, it has to go back to human joy and pleasure and happiness. In other words, if a government can't just justify itself to having power, it has to have power for the purpose of maintaining a certain amount of order for the purpose of having happiness and freedom.
So when I look at...
I'll give you an example. Driving on the freeway, you have to have order, but it's not order just to have order. It's so that if you want to get somewhere, I mean, the whole point is to get somewhere.
That the freeway will serve its purpose of moving people freely without a lot of merging and so on. And there are no stop signs on a freeway. That's what makes a freeway very different from most streets where there are going to be intersections with stop signs. A freeway, there are no stop signs. Potentially you get on, and aside from congestion, you don't have to stop. Well, so as I read about John Stuart Mill's ideas, it made me say, well, a lot of this sounds like it was influential in the creation of our nation. But then when I look at his birth date and death date, it's not the case. You know, this says he's born in 1806. And when I read about his ideas, it sounds like, well, we've already got some of that, at least in our Declaration of Independence and our Bills of Rights. And it made me think, Joe, that maybe the case is that he was operating in England, and he was, in a sense, trying to... His audience was the English or maybe other European countries, maybe to make them more like the United States. Would that be the case?
Well, much of America came out of England in the first place.
Yes.
And so they both come from the same roots. But you have hedonism in the sense of... Hedonism is just the word pleasure. And you can have wild hedonism that doesn't... The reason the word...
Such as drinking to excess.
Yeah, it destroys your other pleasures. And driving in crazily, but it can end all your pleasure. It can put you in a grave. So this hedonism goes way back to before Plato. Now, I would argue that all human societies that have survived have had to have this principle of hedonism and developing rules and regulations.
There's certainly, though, a distinction between whether or not societies have it versus we are conscious of it and write about it and describe it.
Yeah.
So these philosophers are trying to describe systems that are already in place.
Formalize what's already working.
As well as maybe advocating for principles that might improve upon them. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you take the many of the Ten Commandments are based on my opinion, on hedonism. Don't steal.
All right.
You're working for a living. You don't want, and you work for a living, and you buy things, and you want to save your money, and to develop your own happiness and pleasure. You don't want somebody stealing all your money, so you don't have it again.
So we have to have the social rule that thou shalt not steal.
And bearing false witness.
Because it promotes hedonism.
Yeah. And if you have no rule against lying, you don't even have a community. You don't even have a language. Language presupposes you control definitions.
And that you mostly are communicating for truthful reasons.
Yeah. That's the whole point of communicating mostly.
Were there any more points we wanted to make about John Stuart Mill here? Otherwise, we'll need to go into the mid-program break, then we'll come back and deal with the last few subjects.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do the break then.
All right. So, the mid-program break is going to be... All right. All right, I'll grab this thing where it says Host 1. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. Joe, you want to get this one?
The shows are lively.
Live.
And lively.
Every Tuesday from 5 to 5:55 p.m. Eastern Time here in Knoxville, in our community, on Channel 12, or at Channel, what,
194. There's two cable systems, and because I live in Maryville, I don't know which one's which.
And depending on your local situation. And tell your out-of-town friends they can go online to ctvknox, knox.org.
Right, today's show is live. It is the 6th of June, I believe.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And you can call on the number on the screen and speak with us. We do appreciate those calls. While we take a short break, please watch these informative videos about our sponsors.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Are we muted?
Religious leaders and your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org. If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets 1 or 2 times a week. We have regular meetups for fun, food, drink, and conversation. Find us online at knoxvilleatheist.org. The purpose of the ASK is to supply a venue for community camaraderie and outreach to atheist, agnostic, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons in the East Tennessee area. Our Tuesday meeting is going on right now at the somewhat new location of Flats and Taps. It's 7403 Kingston Pike. That's just a little bit east of the Westtown Mall. All right, Joe, you want to...
No, it says here the first Sunday meeting is the 4th. Is that right?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, this was last week's. So jump over down here to the second Monday.
Okay, so the second is the Rationalists of East Tennessee, the Skeptics Book Club.
Yep.
And all the single ladies, unmarried women, and the rise of an independent nation by Rebecca, how do you pronounce her name?
Incorrectly.
Treister.
Well, Treisler, the way I would, Treisler. And that's on Sunday, June 11.
So that'll be this upcoming Sunday.
At 2 p.m. And the public is invited to participate. You don't have to have read the book, but that could help. Visiting visit rationalist.org, and that'll tell you about the rest of the calendar of books and our location. And the book's a million, and that's at 8513 Kingston Pike, right here in Knoxville.
All right.
Right, and our third Sunday meeting will be at the cafeteria on Annex, Goins Administration Building, Pellissippi State Community College.
Yeah.
It will be Leaving the Faith to Focus on the Family. The Colomore family of the Chibi Kodama music fame will share experiences of transitioning from life in a cult to a life of a nun. Moving from the limitations of faith to free thought and exploration can feel like walking naked in a big city. How do you talk to the little ones? How do you learn to be okay with saying, I don't know the answer to that? Join the Colmer family for a discussion of a non-belief and family life. You'll even get to hear from the kids and luck they share with some of the music.
Okay. And by the way, a life in a cult to a life of a nun, that's not a N-U-N. That's
Right.
N-O-N-E.
N-O, yeah. None,
Got
yes.
it. Whatever that means.
Did I spell it wrong? I've been known to do so.
No, you did just
It's to someone who affiliates with no particular anyone.
no
religion.
particular reason. Religion, yeah.
Well, looking at the clock, we got 8 minutes left. We certainly got time for viewers to give us a call. We're discussing the origin of ethics. If you think you know the origin of ethics, give us a call. Or if you want to dispute some of what the philosophers we've been talking about have to say, give us a call. I think we need to move on to Immanuel Kant.
Kant, yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And he lived from 1724 to 1804. So actually, we stepped a little backwards in time. So he's before John Stuart Mill.
Yeah.
All right, I'm feeling disoriented here,
no
but
problem.
all right, I'm anchored again. I've got a grip on the table. Help me with this, Joe.
Well, Kant is saying that the categorical imperative is to do what is right. And that's not an if-then from his point of view. To just have the categorical imperative.
And getting back to the Euthyphro dilemma, that's like command theory again.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's he does not think that's dependent on some theory of God, although he probably was a theist of a sort.
Okay.
See, there are a lot of theists in the world who don't necessarily hold to the notion that it's just the ethics is a dictation from God.
Mm-hmm.
They have different. See, there are all kinds of different views of God.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to. Well, just as you make a distinction, you did earlier in certain views. So among theists, have to make. So there are a lot of theists whose views of ethics are very close to what I would call my view.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see any great because they have a view of ethics. And then if they have a view of God, then their God has to live according to ethics, or he's not God.
So many people get the opposite way around. It's frustrating.
Some people get it the opposite of that. And
If I can ask about Kant, so one of the interesting things about him was that his standard for what is right, what is wrong, it was according to reason alone. Basically based on the foundations of that two people interacting. Maybe you can correct me on this. I might have it wrong. That people are autonomous and can make decisions using their intellect and their awareness of their surroundings. So therefore, they have an obligation to each other to be honest, for instance, and never deviate from that.
Yeah, his view is a person is an end in himself or herself and not a means only. In other words, people aren't just tools.
Right.
They're ends in themselves.
Right, mere means, right? Because I saw this on a video recently, made a good point. We're basically using the studio to convey this message. So we're tools, they're tools, everyone's...
But we choose to do
we're all... It's a kind of symbiotic relationship. But a mere means would be in the case of, like, slavery.
You wouldn't have a choice,
Right.
That's a good distinction, yeah.
All right. Now, what was his audience when he was speaking this? He's maybe trying to address something that was contemporaneous with him, and I'm feeling like I don't understand that aspect of this. What were the questions of his day to which he was making these answers?
Well,
Can you help me with this, Joe?
Well, many of the questions are the questions we're still... In other words, what we're raising today has been raised for centuries.
I suspect, though, that sometimes
Go ahead.
the way they get talked about, the vocabulary shifts, and then then the answers get rephrased in terms of a current vocabulary. Because of course, we started with the Euthyphro dilemma, and that resolved into either something like command theory or utilitarian. You didn't use the word utilitarian, or did you?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
And we, in a way, are somewhat able to talk about the ideas of Bentham and Mills and Kant still with that vocabulary.
Sure,
we could say, and I think you chose most of these to talk about because you're in favor of what they have to say because of its utilitarian nature. You didn't choose to have me prepare any slides where we talked about anyone who's promoting command theory.
Yeah.
That maybe should be another show.
What you could say about Kant is, I think Kant was assuming that human beings are concerned about happiness. But he also realized people have various interpretations about what makes them happy in certain areas of their lives. And so he is saying everybody is an end in himself or herself. In other words, we can't decide for others what makes them happy. They have to have an input to it. And that's why he means they are ends in themselves and not means only.
So when I look at his dates of life, 1724 to 1804, if this had been in the 1600s, I could imagine that his contemporaries might have been warring Catholic and Christian and Protestant factions. But I think that at least it wasn't such a hot war by then. But could he still have been maybe trying to, was he coming out of a purely Protestant tradition, or?
Well, he was coming primarily out of a Protestant tradition, yeah. But even among Protestants, you had great diversity and differences.
I would tend to have thought that the Catholic tradition might have been a little bit more command theory laden.
Yeah, you have an evangelical tradition that says the Bible is the infallible Word of God, and it has it's the Word of God. Now, as
we got 30 seconds left, and then we'll have to start doing the end of show wrap up.
It's human beings interpreting, and that's what I learned in seminary. We enjoy it. It's humans doing the interpretation.
All righty. Well, we might want to slowly go find our end of program notes here. We can read it at a not too fast a pace. I'll start us out. It's time to get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
And you can give us feedback, if you would, by voicemail. Here it is, 865-272-9060. Or email freethoughtforum, all one word, freethoughtforum @yahoo.com.
You can see this show on Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on this Knoxville station or online at ctvknox.org.
The opinions expressed on this show are of the hosts and guests and our callers, if any, and they are not any official opinion of ASK or RET. We would like to thank Sam for technical support, the staff at CTV Knox, and our viewers and our callers.
And nuns are those who are saying they have no particular religion and are the fastest growing group, religious group in America.
Yep. So if you don't believe in God, you're